BYU takes down TCU 44-13. Mitch Harper, Kyle Ireland with you in Provo, Utah, as the Cougars bounce back after that disappointing loss last week against Texas Tech, and they take down TCU 44-13. The Cougars are now 9-1 overall, 6-1 in Big 12 play. First win over TCU in 18 years. Kyle, this was as complete of a performance as we've seen from this BYU team in 2025.
Yeah, Mitch, if we wanted to nitpick, we could probably come up with, maybe 5, 6, 7 things that we want to fix about what BYU did tonight. But, there were only a couple of things where you're like, okay, like that was an obvious mistake. BYU played a really clean game of football tonight, and that was even mentioned by TCU's head coach, Sonny Dykes, after the game. He thought BYU played spectacularly, and, Bear Bachmeier had a nice bounce-back performance after his worst game of the season. BYU responded from their first loss in a bad loss on the road in Lubbock last week. They responded in the exact way that you would have hoped.
First 7 drives of the game, BYU scores in all 7 of them. And I think what was noteworthy, too, within those first 7 drives, 5 of the drives had at least 10 plays or more. Methodical plays or methodical drives where BYU's eating up the clock, playing their style of football. Aaron Roderick this week said they wanted to get back to their identity. I think we saw that this week. BYU ends up the night 296 passing yards, 151 on the ground. Kalani Sitake noted that they wanted to see more passing from Bear. Let him throw it a little bit more. He didn't need max pass protection all the time to throw the football. I thought that was noteworthy. And Bear Bachmeier, I think, had his best game as a BYU Cougar. 23 of 33, 296 yards, 70% completion rate, 1 passing touchdown, and then on the ground, 10 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown. This was an excellent bounce back from Bear, much needed, and shows that this guy's got some toughness to him.
Yeah, I mean, as a true freshman, you expected him to have a game at some point like he did a week ago, to be able to come out and be super poised. And, TCU, that wasn't a bad team that BYU played tonight, Mitch. That's a 6-win team. They're going to go bowling. And BYU, really just they controlled this game from start to finish. And that was the thing that was really impressive. It wasn't like there was any lull. They had a fast start. That's been a subject in the last little bit for BYU, especially offensively. It was just nice to see them come out. The first drive, the only thing there is Parker Kingston dropped a touchdown on the initial drive, and you're like, okay, like you would have preferred that, but Will Farron ends up making a 52-yard field goal, and we've seen in recent games how Will's been able to, show his struggles as well, that he is human, and so being able to have that, Will ended up being 3 for 3 on field goals tonight, so nice bounce back performance from him as well. But Bear was not superhuman like he has been at times. You saw, those moments against Utah or Iowa State, Arizona, where the heroic kind of Bear came out. Bear just played solid football tonight. And I also think that kind of extended to the rest of the team, Mitch. It wasn't like there was a superstar performance from anybody that I felt, at least. It was just like the whole team played the closest to a 60-minute football game that they played all year.
And I think that's, reason for optimism heading down the stretch, because after that humbling loss to a Texas Tech team that is really good, and we saw that on Saturday once again as they hammered UCF in Lubbock on their senior day festivities. It could have been easy to question how good are we really in terms of, if you're referring to BYU players in that locker room, how they could be asking that. But I thought this was a really sound performance by all accounts from BYU, and I think it was a great bounce back because we saw last year 1 loss turned into 2 in a hurry, and then the season was lost, and they didn't reach Arlington. This team's got some fight, some competitiveness, and they could have easily been questioning themselves this past week, but they kind of tuned out the noise, got locked in. I thought they were super focused and dialed in for the preparation for this game, and I just like the feel of this game, starting things out. I thought some noteworthy stats. BYU was 5 of 5 in the red zone, not all of which were touchdowns. You still want to, get those touchdowns rather than field goals. As you noted, Will Farron had 3 field goals. But I thought that BYU, too, was, really aggressive, I thought. And I thought that they were the efficiency from Bear Bachmeier passing the football, 70% completion rate. He was making quick decisions, and he was getting that ball out quick. I thought that was impressive to see. And, again, I just think that you took a big step in the right direction when In November, you want to play championship football. BYU finally gets a win over a team that has at least 6 wins in the month of November. First time they've done that since joining the Big 12. I think that's something to be excited about. And I just think that this was a statement that said, hey, BYU deserves to be a team in the college football playoff bracket going forward.
Yeah, I liked the way that BYU was able to run the ball tonight, Mitch, as well. It wasn't their best running performance by any stretch, but LJ Martin had 88 yards on the ground. Bear added 59 yards. And then you look at the long for LJ, it was only 10 yards. It wasn't like he broke off a 40-yard run or anything like that, like he has at times this season in some of his bigger rushing performances. It was just methodical drives, like you mentioned, where they were just taking, 5-6 yards. And, it was nice to see BYU be able to consistently move the chains because they got into a nice rhythm early, and that kind of sustained them throughout the first 3 quarters especially, and then in the fourth quarter it was all about style points. But it was nice because BYU was able to run the ball to set up the pass, where you think about the Iowa State game where they really had to throw the ball a lot in that game as a necessity, and then they struggled in the West Virginia game to run the ball because LJ was banged up, and so Bear ended up having a 300-yard passing game in that performance. He almost throws for 300 yards tonight, but they were also able to run the ball too.
It was a impressive showing, I think, from BYU. Parker Kingston led BYU in receiving yards, 80 yards on the night. Carson Ryan, I thought, was the most noteworthy performance. Career high 79 receiving yards, which included a touchdown grab, of 43 yards, a lot of which were yards after catch, showing that speed, the former UCLA and Utah transfer. I think that this, Carson Ryan talked about it in his I think radio, TV. He did like 3 interviews in the post game, and then he caught up with us at the very end of it. But he said in one of them that he wanted to, show that this team is dominant. They wanted to make a statement in this game because I do believe style points matter a little bit. I thought it was huge for BYU to, get that 68-yard pick 6 from Tanner Wall at the end to make it a, game where you score more than 40, you win by more than 30. I think that stuff matters. Kalani is always very diplomatic, and I'm not going to, make a campaign for BYU's candidacy for the playoff. Well, if he doesn't, who is? Texas Tech head coach Joey McGuire is always pretty bullish on the Big 12, and he'll go to bat for the league. But I think Kalani should maybe take a bigger stand, because I think what's going to be facing BYU, and there's a lot of football left to be played still, but when you have teams like Oklahoma beating Alabama, both of those teams are going to be viewed just to be in. Even though Alabama lost to a team in Florida State who might not go to a bowl game again. Oklahoma's good, but those are 2 lost teams. BYU's 1 loss is to the number 6 team in the country, to Texas Tech, and this is a good football team that's one of the best and should be comfortably in what feels like the playoff bracket, yet it still feels like, will it be enough for the committee, what they did tonight and what they do going forward, to get into that 12-team playoff? It raises questions. I would like to see Kalani get a little more aggressive on that and just say, you know what? Here's some data. Here's some points. Now, I know from his standpoint, he's looking at it, a lot of football left to be played. Maybe at the end of the Big 12 championship game, if they get there, maybe he starts to politic and maybe make a bigger case for BYU. But to me, it's just like BYU's always been that overlooked program. At some point, how do you combat the narrative and say, you know what? This is a winning program that always has done it for a high level for 50-plus years. And since joining the Big 12, this has been one of the most consistent programs in the league.
Yeah, I think that the humble and hungry mentality is a positive one. It's a nice culture kind of motto and slogan for the players, and the fans can embrace it. But at the end of the day, Mitch, if you want to be one of the big boys, if you want to be one of the Power 4 teams that's playing, deep into December and into January, you have to be one of those teams that's out there saying how good you are. And I appreciate the fact that, Kalani even mentioned in his post game tonight, he was like, before the game, I talked on the field with Sonny Dykes, and we were talking about, man, the Big 12, how awesome it is. It's like, it is awesome, but you also need to be a representative in the college football playoff conversation as well, to be able to not only pitch yourself, but the league, because it does seem like, Mitch, even the Texas Tech win, like Texas Tech, in my opinion,
Texas Tech loss?
No, they could end up, Texas Tech themselves could end up being, the second or third or fourth best team in the country. and BYU ends up losing to that team on their home field, and that was an outstanding win for them. But BYU, like that's a good loss, I guess. And BYU has everything in front of them. If they go to Arlington, there's a lot in front of them still. But it's also like BYU has to be able to take its own resume, its wins. It's 9 wins now, and a good TCU win tonight, and be able to show, hey, like we are one of the best 10, 11 best teams in the country. The fact that they're 12th now, like Kalani should be like, I'm sure that maybe behind the scenes he's a little disrespected by it, but you would like to kind of see a little bit of that.
It's lame that college football coaches even have to possibly politic, but it's just kind of how it goes. It seems like, especially in the Big 12, where the margins are so thin for teams in this league. And I think that was an impressive showing tonight from BYU against TCU. And TCU, just a side note, they're 6-4. I feel like that program is just treading water. 3 years ago, they were in the national championship game, and I just don't feel like they have any identity right now. I feel like it's a program that's really lost the momentum, the excitement that they had built in that first year under Sonny Dykes. Now, what does that mean long term? I don't know, but it just TCU feels like they've taken a massive step back. When BYU joined the league, I thought this was going to be one of the great programs in the Big 12, and look, they could still do that in the years to come, but I just think they are kind of stale. They're stagnant right now. BYU made them look stagnant, of course, and Josh Hoover, who had a career day against BYU 2 years ago, on Saturday night, he couldn't get really anything going. Only 10 completions, 183 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 INTs. BYU's defense held TCU to only 1 touchdown the entire game. It was an impressive showing, I think, from BYU's defense, holding TCU to 115 rushing, 183 pass. You'll take that any night. Under 300 total yards. That's a good spot for Jay Hill's defense.
Yeah, you talked about the interception for touchdown by Tanner Wall, but Falatau Satuala had a nice interception as well. It seems like he's been one of those guys consistently week after week that has made a big play, a turnover play, a big, momentum swinging kind of a play from him. But I thought Keanu Tainavasa had an awesome game tonight as well, and he said after the game that probably was his best game of the season, and it was nice to see him get in the backfield and get another sack tonight. I thought the front seven has been really active, Mitch, the last month or so, more so than they were earlier this year, and it's nice to see that. I do think that TCU didn't present a lot as far as the run game was concerned, and so that's something that you brought up earlier today on the radio that I think that BYU will need to address as the season moves forward, and especially if they make it to Arlington. But tonight, Mitch, there's not a lot to complain about. There's not a lot that BYU fans can say, hey, like they need to correct those things. I feel like the way that they could have responded after a bad loss a week ago, the way that they ended up losing 2 in a row last season, which was another big talking point this last week about, they had everything in front of them last year after that Kansas loss at home, and then, things fizzled out from there. But BYU, so far, with these final 3 games, the first one is now checked off, and they responded properly.
LJ Martin, I thought, was a highlight in this game. 21 carries, 88 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. He also had 4 receptions, so that's 25 touches for LJ.
He seemed healthier tonight, didn't he?
He did, and that's the type of workload you need to have from the star running back in LJ Martin. You don't want to get him to that century mark when he's getting 20 touches on the ground, but I thought he looked really good, and that's promising too. That's what I think the biggest takeaway I come with out of this game is that you feel a lot better. A lot of the concerns you experienced for this BYU team against Tech, they got completely erased against a far inferior team in TCU, where those issues didn't carry over against an inferior team. Maybe you just chalk it up and say, you know what, Texas Tech's just that good, and they're that good of a team, and hopefully BYU can get a crack at them once again to see what they can do against them in early December. But I thought that was promising to see LJ Martin. I also thought, too, in some underrated, noteworthy appearances from a deep cut personnel standpoint. Reggie Frischneck, he gets some run because Cody Hagan was out. So you see Reggie Frischneck getting a catch, 1 grab. Then also on the touchdown run for LJ Martin, at the beginning of the fourth quarter, you see some 13 personnel, Carson Ryan, Noah Moiaki, and Trevin Osler, offensive lineman, now lining up at tight end for BYU. He was in on that touchdown run for the Cougars. So some new looks by Aaron Roderick and this offensive staff, getting a little bit creative to throw some new looks out there on film for teams when they get ready for Cincinnati and then UCF in this stretch run. But again, to your point, Kyle, it's hard to nitpick this night because this was a sound win from start to finish. It was never in question. BYU jumped on TCU early, never let the Horned Frogs really get into this thing. They took care of the football. They had one turnover, but I think BYU, by all accounts, this was a pretty impressive night for the Cougs.
Yeah, and Fuller Shirts' drop there. It was one of those situations where it's like that can't happen, but Kalani didn't seem too upset about it the way that he was upset about the turnovers a week ago.
Well, and that was interesting. Fuller Shirts gets the start at punter, and you're thinking naturally, man, those shanks really angered Kalani Sitake from Sam Vanderhaar. Kalani said in the postgame that Sam was banged up at Texas Tech. They had Sam on holder duties tonight, but Fuller Shirts, the transfer from Boise State, he got the starting nod at punter. If I had to guess, he's probably not starting next week after what transpired there. I mean, look, some shanks are not good, but I'd rather see a shank punt that goes 20 yards than a fumble when you're trying to attempt a punt. Yeah. That wasn't a good look. Shirts, he's got a good leg. You saw that on his first punt attempt, but hopefully BYU can kind of, in future games, do what they did tonight and just start off the first 7 drives, not having to turn to the punter and just score some more as they did tonight against TCU. I think also defensively, when we bring up the pass rush, Keanu Tanavasa, who you said, definitely his best game as a BYU Cougar. First sack for Keanu since the Stanford game in week 2. I also was impressed with Nusi Taumoepeau and then also Tausili Akana. Nusi gets a sack on the final play of the game, defensive play of the game for BYU to close it out officially. And then Tausili Akana, 2.5 tackles for loss, 4 total tackles. Look, I've been singing the praises of Tausili Akana since fall camp. This guy's big time. Now I think it's starting to click. That's exciting for BYU because this pass rush, they're getting home. They're getting to the QB. TCU was pretty good at keeping Josh Hoover upright this season. To get 4 sacks on him, I think that's pretty impressive.
The thing that's impressive to me about Tausili's performance, Mitch, is we talked 2 months ago about this stretch run that BYU's nearing the end of where it was the meat of their schedule.
Arizona, Utah, Iowa State, Tech, and now TCU.
Good quarterback play, good offensive lines, and that was when Tausili started making his mark.
Yeah, good point.
He came on.
And Nusi.
Yes, as well. Obviously coming back from injury there with Nusi and, just being able to have those guys be so young and so promising is a really exciting thing for BYU as far as the future is concerned. But, yeah, I really just have been impressed with the front 7 over the last little bit. They had 4 sacks tonight, 0 for TCU. Bear was clean tonight. I thought the BYU offensive line on the other side of it also, they did a really nice job as well. And you talked about how they didn't go, max protect like they did a week ago. They kind of let the tackles do their job. Isaiah Jotta's got to clean up the holding penalties. Yes. He had another one tonight, but I thought that, Andrew Gentry had a really nice block as well tonight that I saw that helped for a touchdown for BYU. It just seemed like everybody kind of stepped up tonight, Mitch.
And that's a great point on the penalties. Only 2 penalties, though. So Jotta's one holding. That was only one of 2 penalties on the night for BYU. TCU had 5 for 45 yards. Another positive note, relatively speaking, we'll see what happens going forward, but pretty healthy coming out of this game. Waylon Lapuaho suffered an injury. What was it reported by Spencer Linton on BYU TV? An ankle sprain, I believe. We'll have to double check on that. But Kalani Sitake said that they think Waylon will be okay.
Yeah, left ankle.
Left ankle. So Kalani noted that Waylon's pretty tough. We'll see how Waylon performs. We did see a lot of Sonny Mocassini coming in at left guard, and that's okay because the nice thing at guard with how much they've interchanged that spot this year, I still think Waylon's excellent, and you want to have Waylon in at left guard. That's your best starting 5. But the nice thing is you got Mocassini, you got Leausa, You got Safarichuk at guard. You've got a lot of reserves that have got a lot of starting experience this year that can play at that guard spot. So if you did need to go to Cincinnati, and again, Kalani said in the postgame in regards to Whalen that he should be okay, but you never know. When the adrenaline wears down and you get to Sunday morning, it's like, ooh, that's a little sore, a little more sore than how it felt Saturday night when the adrenaline is running high. So we'll see on him. Also, Max Alford, he went into the medical tent for a little bit as well. He was being attended to by trainers, and Alford had a nice game tonight. Alford had a pressure where he forced Josh Hoover near the sideline for a short gain that then forced a field goal attempt. Alford's playing some good football in relief of Cialia Serra when he gets a breather. Alford ended up with 6 tackles on the night. But again, I think that this was a really positive performance for this BYU team. And I think it makes it clear again that BYU is absolutely good enough to be in the college football playoff. I think that message should be sent to the committee. And I'm really curious to see how they view this game for BYU, but also the other data points on BYU's resume. Arizona, 7-3, big win on the road at Cincinnati. And then who would have thought this, Kyle? East Carolina beats Memphis. East Carolina's in contention to go win the American. BYU beat that team in Greenville soundly. The Pirates could possibly be in the playoff. So maybe BYU has got some pieces of their resume that have kind of been boosted up along with this dominant performance. So I'd like to think that this is a top 10 football team in Tuesday's rankings, but part of me thinks they'll probably only be 11, and then they'll be on that cut line for the bracket. But I think BYU showed that this is a really good football team.
Yeah, it is interesting, Mitch, because you think about just the resume conversation. It's like East Carolina, it seemed like it was so long ago. If that was an East Carolina game in a week or 2 weeks, does that game look different? Does Cincinnati losing take some luster out of that game next week? Arizona, though, really good win now in BYU's resume. And, had that been a game where BYU's playing Arizona next week, that's a massive game. It's funny how the schedule and the way that things play out end up working. But I do want to bring up one thing that I was thinking about to this game, Mitch, because you talked about these younger guys and guys like Max Alford stepping up and Nusi and Tausili. I do think that BYU, their depth has been tested at times this season, and it does feel like they do have some areas to work on still. But they've weathered a lot of this schedule with the depth, and that was really nice to see, because 2 years ago, their first year in the Big 12, this would not have happened. And so they've continued to make strides. Obviously, great season a year ago, another great season so far this season. But it is nice to see, just as a program as a whole, BYU is continuing to build and take awesome steps. Tonight, though, it was interesting. Preston Rex didn't get any run. Yep. Enoch Nawahine was the backup running back tonight. And then I also thought it was interesting, didn't see a ton of Raider Demooney after he came back a week ago at Texas Tech. He had that injury against Iowa State, and so something maybe to keep an eye on. I didn't see anything where Raider was banged up or anything on the sideline. It's just I didn't see a lot of him on the field tonight.
Another, maybe if you do want to get a little nitpicky, TCU receiver Eric McAllister, who came into the game 17 yards per catch. He had some big gains. 4 catches, 107 yards, a lot of which were yards after the catch, 64 yards. He did have 10 targets, so BYU kept him in check to where he's only catching 40% of his targets, but still to give up 26 yards per catch. That's an area where General Guilford and the staff will say, hey, we got to eliminate that. Credit, though, on one of the long catches. What was it, the 47-yarder? That was a quick pass from Hoover to McAllister. Tavion Beasley, great effort, prevents the touchdown. TCU has to settle for a field goal. But TCU's got some big play receiver capabilities, but I thought BYU's secondary was up to the task on Saturday night, along with this entire BYU team. And now they turn their attention to the Cincinnati Bearcats coming up on Saturday. Now, we don't know yet. Still, I don't believe that the Big 12, as of this recording, has sent out the kick times. We got some kick times in the SEC, the ACC. We're still on this 6-day selection stuff. Please, Big 12, don't do any more of these next week. Just give us the announcement for Cincy on Sunday. Monday, give us the UCF game, please. These dreaded 6-day holds drive us insane with the planning purposes, but that's first world problems. Cougs going to be playing with a lot of confidence. They'll have a 2-time zone game next week, so they'll travel on Thursday. It'll be kind of an abbreviated week in terms of practice availability for us, I would expect, where we'll get to see the team on Tuesday. We'll have the Monday presser as well with Kalani Sitake and players, but season's in full swing. I mean, it's heading down to the home stretch, Kyle. Opportunity to get to Arlington and really, make this season a special one for the Cougars.
If BYU plays the way they did tonight, Mitch, BYU is going to be in Arlington. If they play even, 75, 80%, I would believe that they beat Cincinnati next week. I just think that BYU is that good of a team. They're obviously not at Texas Tech's level, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because they can maybe catch them on an off day in Arlington. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. But Cincinnati, UCF at home in 2 weeks, those are winnable games. Cincinnati's a good football team, so they can't overlook them, but I also think that TCU is a good team, and they didn't overlook them tonight. So they just have to keep doing what they've been doing for the most part. And I do think that this team came in tonight. They looked prepared. They looked like it was a calm confidence, like we're okay. It was just nice to see them respond that way because there was part of me that was like, is it going to be the same thing that happened last year? I just had that in the back of my mind. And then the game happened, and it was nice to see the way they responded.
It was nice to see football get a win. Basketball, on the other hand, did not. UConn takes down the Cougars 86-84.
So close, though, Mitch.
Valiant effort by BYU basketball. We were watching it in the stadium. The students for the first half got to watch in the stands. It was on the big screen, and then once the clock hit that 90-minute countdown, they switched it over just kind of the standard schedule inside LaVell Edwards Stadium. But valiant effort by DeBonsa and Richie Saunders and crew. Down 2 starters without Keba Keita, who goes out with what appeared to be a head injury. And then, of course, Kennard Davis dealing with the violation of team rules as Kevin Young classified it. Obviously, he was arrested for an alleged DUI on Thursday here in Provo, but a valiant effort from that BYU basketball squad in Provo. And I think what was noteworthy there, they moved up in the advanced metrics. Ken Palm, they moved up 2 spots. So I don't want to say job accomplished because you want to get the win, but they showed that they're a tough team. And so what I'm saying is great times for Cougar fans right now with a college football playoff contender in football, and then BYU basketball, I think one of the great teams in the sport this season and has Final Four potential. Final thoughts, Kyle, before we get out of here?
Yeah, just on basketball, Mitch, BYU kind of died by the 3 a little bit tonight. Mihailo Boskovic was 0 for 5. Richie Saunders was 0 for 7 from 3. That really hurts. And then I thought that Rob Wright, his 6 turnovers, especially BYU fans are going to focus on that last one, which obviously, they had a chance to tie the game there at the end. But I just think that, your point guard can't have 6 turnovers, especially when you're playing a top 10 team. But BYU, I mean, they're a great team. AJ DeBonsa was spectacular.
25 points.
And lived up to the hype, especially in front of his home crowd. So that was really fun to see. But, yeah, BYU's got a lot in front of them. And, just kind of like football, this is what Cougar fans have dreamed of for decades. And so just kind of relish it, take it all in.
It's going to be fun to see this stretch run for football and then, of course, see all the ebbs and flows of this BYU basketball season. But, again, productive night for BYU football. 44-13 win. First time they take down TCU since 2007. A little bit of revenge, too, for Josh Hoover and the Horned Frogs. They beat BYU 44-11 2 years ago. Cougs get it done, almost the exact number, 44-13 on Saturday night. So subscribe to Cougar Tracks, subscribe to Cougar Sports Saturday, wherever you get your podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and a review, and also subscribe to the KSL Sports YouTube page. Appreciate all of you for watching or listening to this show. We'll talk to you next time here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSL Sports.